I'll my story to the end and comment with the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. After being discharged, the emptiness of the house seemed more aggressive than any diagnosis. The sound of the clock on the wall reminded me that time was passing, but no one was arriving. Called Diane, then Lucas. First it went to voicemail. Then no return. The excuse last time had been a meeting, a trip, an urgent commitment. This time, not even the silence was disguised with a lie. I got up slowly, still feeling the weight of my weakened body. Each step was a reminder that I was no longer the tireless woman I once was. I put the kettle on the stove, more out of habit than desire. The smell of tea brought no comfort. I looked at my cell phone on the table. A notification flashed. Bank. No familiar name, no affectionate message. I wondered when, exactly, I had become invisible. So many years being everyone's mainstay, and now there wasn't even anyone to ask if I needed bread. The heart crisis passed, but it opened a deeper hole in my soul. The worst wasn't the physical pain. It was the echo of absence. The emptiness in the photo frames, in the forgotten dates, in the ignored birthdays. It was as if I was slowly being erased from the memory of my own children. I tried to rationalize. Maybe they were busy, overwhelmed. But deep down I knew. The modern world justified with lack of time what, in reality, was a lack of affection. And there, alone, I understood that I was no longer anyone's priority. My phone went silent, and with it, the last spark of hope. Meredith arrived as always, without warning, but with a full heart. She was my only bridge to what was left of kindness in the world. She came in with hurried steps and a grocery bag, saying she brought fresh bread and the soup that saves tired bones. I smiled, trying to hide the nausea that had been with me since the hospital. I didn't want to worry anyone, especially not her. She watched me with eyes that knew more than I was saying. "Are you eating?" she asked, even though she knew the answer. I changed the subject, talked about last night's rain, the roof that seemed to need repair. She let me talk, respecting my silence behind the words. But there was sadness in her gaze, as if she saw beyond the facade. While she heated the soup in the kitchen, I leaned my head back in the armchair and closed my eyes. For a moment I imagined myself in another time. One where the house was full of voices, footsteps, life. The smell of food mixed with children's laughter. All of that seemed like a distant memory, almost dreamed. Meredith returned with the hot bowl, and I forced a smile. I thanked her, held the spoon with difficulty, trying to keep my hand steady. Every movement seemed to demand more than I had. Meredith told me a funny story about the neighbor's cat, trying to get a laugh out of me. I managed a small, sincere but brief one. The nausea returned and I needed to hide it. I hid the nausea with a smile, but Meredith didn't seem convinced. After Meredith left, the house plunged into an even deeper silence. I lay on the couch with a blanket on my legs, listening to the sounds of the street filtered through the window. Twilight tinted the walls golden, as if the day, even at its end, insisted on bringing some beauty. That's when I heard knocks on the door. 3 firm, dry, unfamiliar taps. I got up with effort, hesitating for a second. No one usually visited me without warning. I peered through the curtain. A man with gray hair, a beard, and attentive eyes. He didn't look like a salesman, nor did he seem lost. I opened the door slowly. He smiled, but without haste, like someone who knew it wasn't a time for forced friendliness. In his hands, an envelope. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Whitmore," he asked, and I confirmed with a nod. "I have something for you." It was a very old request. I was confused, but he continued, as if fulfilling a mission. "Your father asked me to deliver this personally." He was very clear. Even after so many years, she needs to know. My father's name made my chest burn with surprise. The letter seemed to have traveled decades to reach my hands. It wasn't just any envelope. It was the kind of paper that carries confession, secret, or will. The man's hands trembled slightly as he held it out. I took it delicately, feeling the symbolic weight it carried. The sender's name was real, unmistakable. My father. He just said, "Your father asked me to deliver this personally, even after so many years." I invited the stranger in, my fingers still gripping the envelope. He introduced himself as Elliot Graves, and his presence was serene, despite the mystery he carried. He sat on the edge of the armchair, as if not wanting to intrude. There was something in his posture that made me relax, even though my heart was pounding. He began to talk about the past, about how he met my father. I could barely keep up with him. He said they met when they were young, during a season when my father was traveling on business. At first, I thought he was just another acquaintance from youth, someone clinging to old memories. But as he spoke, I realized there were unspoken layers to that story. The relationship seemed too intimate, shrouded in something deeper. Your father helped me through a difficult time in my life, Elliot explained. He offered me advice, shelter, even financial support. He said he saw something in me that he wanted to protect. With each word, my chest tightened. My father was never one to get deeply involved with anyone outside the family, or so I thought. Elliot looked at me with tear-filled eyes. He spoke of you with pride. Always with pride. But there was a pain he didn't share with anyone. That phrase made me frown. He said he had failed someone important, that he hadn't had the courage to do the right thing. Elliot took the envelope from inside his jacket. He wrote this letter many years ago, but made me promise to only deliver it after he was gone. And with firm hands he placed it on my lap. When he said my father's name, I felt the ground move. I opened the envelope with hesitant fingers, almost fearing what I would find inside. The handwriting was unmistakable. I read the first sentence and felt the weight of decades fall on my shoulders. My dearest Helen. It was him. My father. He spoke with affection, with pain, with guilt. The letter was more than a plea for forgiveness. It was a confession. He said he had made mistakes he never had the courage to explain. That he had made difficult decisions to protect the family, but that, in the end, those decisions haunted him. He spoke of people he loved, of hidden relationships, of how much he wished he had told me everything in life. Each line was an old wound being touched again. I cried in silence, letting the words flow with my tears. The letter ended with a phrase that still echoes in me. You deserve to know the truth, even if you hate me for it. My father had always been a complex figure, but now he gained dimensions I had never imagined. Human dimensions. Flawed. Real. I folded the paper carefully, as if it were glass about to break. I looked at Elliot, who kept his eyes down. Did he regret it? I asked. He nodded. More than anything. A part of me wanted more explanations. Another part just needed that recognition. A request for forgiveness, even if late, was a relief I didn't know I needed. His words echoed in my soul. I could never ask for forgiveness in person, but you need to know the truth. The silence between us was full of unspoken meanings. I expected Elliot to say goodbye, to end his mission there. But he remained seated, looking at his hands, as if still carrying something heavy. Is there more? I asked, already fearing the answer. He took a deep breath, hesitant. What's in the letter is only part of it. An important part. But not all of it. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Elliot seemed to struggle with the words, as if any misplaced phrase could destroy what was left. I didn't want to be the one to tell you this. But your father told me something else. His voice faltered. The urgency in his eyes was real. The hesitation only reinforced the weight of what was still to come. I remained still. Then just say it. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to find courage. It's hard to explain. But if I don't say it, it would be like betraying what he entrusted to me. Every second of that suspense seemed like an eternity. A secret hanging between us, about to be revealed. Something that would change everything. I knew it. I felt it. Elliot then looked me directly in the eyes, with a gleam of painful truth. Helen, I need to tell you something that might change everything you know about your family. My heart pounded, my hands tingled. Everything inside me screamed. No, not now. But life doesn't ask if we're ready. I don't know if you'll hate me after what I'm about to say. I watched Elliot for long seconds, trying to find in his features some familiar trait, some trace of the man who was my father. The silence after his sentence seemed like a suspended bridge between two worlds about to collide. Who were you to him? I asked, feeling my voice fail. Elliot took a deep breath, as if that question carried more than simple curiosity. I was someone important and forgotten, he replied softly. I was not content with evasions. I asked him to tell me everything from the beginning. He spoke of his simple childhood with his mother, of how she always said his father was a noble but distant man. There was never a name, only vague clues. Until one day he found a box with old letters and my father's name carefully engraved. I looked for him for years, Elliot said, looking at the floor. But he never wanted to see me. I felt the old wound of paternal absence ache in another body. Did you have contact with him? I asked, a knot forming in my chest. Elliot nodded. He said they met a few times discreetly when he was already an adult. He helped me financially. It was the way he found to compensate. My heart was beating too fast. Too many things were happening all at once. And your mother? I questioned. Elliot looked out the window as if seeing the past. She loved him. And always called him forbidden love. Those words hit me like a gust. Forbidden love. It was like the name of a tragic romance. But it was my father's story. My family's. And maybe mine too. He lowered his eyes and said, "My mother called your father forbidden love." I slowly got up and went to the kitchen, looking for any excuse to get away from the whirlwind of thoughts. I prepared 2 cups of tea, my hands trembling. When I returned, Elliot was waiting for me in the same spot, his eyes fixed on the photographs on the wall. I handed him the cup and sat down. "Did you come all this way just to give me the letter?" I asked, even though I knew it wasn't just that. He hesitated, took a sip of tea and then spoke. "No, I came because I think we're siblings." The cup almost slipped from my fingers. A buzzing filled my ears. That was absurd. Unthinkable. And yet, something inside me couldn't immediately reject it. "How can you be sure?" I asked, even without wanting to hear the answer. "My mother always told me he was my father," he explained. "And after he died, I found documents confirming that he made constant deposits in her name for over 30 years. Time stopped. It was too much information, too much pain mixed with doubt. "And why now?" I asked. "Because he wanted you to know." He felt guilty. I held the cup tighter, trying to stay centered. A part of me screamed it was a lie. Another part felt that it made sense. There was an emptiness between us that was filled with untold truths. "Do you have any proof?" I asked in a hoarse voice. He nodded. "Yes, I do. And I want to show you." My hands trembled as I held the cup. I had a brother? Night was falling, yet I didn't turn on the lights. The twilight covered the living room with a gloom that seemed to match the atmosphere. Elliot looked at me calmly, without pressure, like someone who knew that this process needed time. I, on the other hand, felt everything racing inside me. Memories, longing, gaps. So many gaps. "I want to believe you," I confessed. "But it's hard." He understood. He said he would doubt too if he were in my place, and that he just wanted a chance to be heard. This wasn't a demand, nor a request for immediate acceptance. It was just a gesture, a delivery, and that disarmed me more than any requirement. I remembered my father's face, the few times he was more than an austere shadow. The words in the letter gained new meanings. Perhaps he really carried guilt he never confessed. Perhaps he loved in silence. And perhaps he left, unintentionally, another broken legacy. A hidden child. Forgotten link. I looked at Elliot more closely. There was something familiar about him. Not in physical features, but in the way he listened, in the sad calm with which he faced the world. It was as if we were made of the same emotional fabric. An inherited melancholy, perhaps. Or a connection that transcends blood. Even confused, I knew he wasn't just another stranger. The next day, Elliot returned with a small box in his hands. We sat in the living room again, and he opened it carefully. There were letters, old photos, deposit receipts, and a handkerchief embroidered with his mother's initials. I picked up one of the letters, trembling. The handwriting paralyzed me. It was my father's. Round, firm, unmistakable. I read the first lines with my heart pounding. It was a short letter but full of feeling. My father wrote to Elliot's mother with affection. He mentioned our boy, and said he dreamed of a reality where he could acknowledge his son without fear. "They would never accept it," he said. "But I love him even from a distance." The dates matched the periods when my father was traveling for work. I remembered those absences. My mother never questioned, always resigned. Maybe she knew. Maybe not. Maybe she chose not to know. It was a world full of complicit silences. where truths were kept like forbidden relics. I picked up another document. A bank statement. Regular transfers for over 30 years. All sent to the same woman. She kept everything, Elliot said. She said that one day you would have to know. That woman, his mother, died 2 years ago. And with her went the last possible words. Papers remained. And a man searching for his own origin. The handwriting matched my father's and my heart tightened. Deeper in the box, I found another envelope, this time addressed to Elliot himself. It was the last letter my father wrote before he died. Elliot authorized me to read it. The text began with an apology, followed by something darker. They threatened me, the letter said. They said that if I acknowledged you, they would destroy my family. I stopped breathing for a second. Who? I asked. Elliot didn't know. His father was never specific. But there were implicit names. Important people from his circle. My father always had influential friends, especially in real estate and politics. It was possible. He wasn't the type of man easily manipulated. But when it came to reputation, he bowed. The idea that my father was blackmailed into hiding a child was too cruel. But every piece seemed to fit. The silence. The absences. The lost looks on birthdays. The coldness disguised as composure. Perhaps it was all a disguise for pain. And perhaps Elliot was the price of a forced choice. I thought he rejected me out of shame, Elliot said, his voice choked. But now, I see he was afraid. Afraid of losing what he already had. Afraid of facing a world that didn't forgive moral mistakes. A fear that cost a lifetime of distance between father and son. And now between brother and sister. My father was blackmailed into hiding his own son? I spent the night awake, reading and rereading the documents, trying to understand where everything began to unravel. The memory of my father began to reconstruct itself in another light. More human, more tragic. I could no longer see him merely as the man who raised me, but as someone who also suffered, erred, and omitted. At dawn I made a decision. I needed answers that only one person could give me. Clint Patterson. He was my father's closest friend. They had been together for decades. If anyone knew the truth behind the blackmail, it would be him. Elliot agreed to accompany me. I felt that path could no longer be walked alone. Meredith, always careful, offered to come along too. Clint isn't exactly trustworthy, she said. But I had to risk it. I needed to look into the eyes of someone who might have helped hide the truth for so long. My father was dead, but those who remained might be able to clarify the remaining pieces of this broken story. Every step now was a deeper dive into a past that had always seemed clear to me, but which now proved to be murky. I no longer knew what was real memory and what was emotional construction, but I knew I couldn't stop. The past was knocking, and I was ready to face it. If anyone knows the truth, it's him. Clint greeted us on his porch with the same tired look of someone carrying more past than future. First, he tried to evade the questions. He spoke in circles, repeating that those were other times, and that no one comes out of life unscathed. But I was tired of half-truths. I looked him directly in the eyes and said, "My father had another son, and you know about it." The reaction was a heavy silence. Elliot remained by my side, in respectful silence. Clint ran a hand over his face, visibly uncomfortable. "Your father was my friend. More than that, he was my soul brother. I promised to protect his reputation, and that included hiding some truths." My heart ached. "You knew from the beginning?" I asked. He looked away. Elliot's mother appeared once. She asked him to acknowledge the boy. He hesitated, and he asked for my advice. Clint's voice dragged, as if each word was a betrayal. I said it was dangerous, that it would ruin his life, yours, your mother's. He listened, and never spoke of it again. I felt anger, pain, and an emptiness difficult to describe. "Do you think protecting someone means hiding a child?" I burst out. Clint shook his head, dejected. "I don't know. I only know that I made a mistake, and that perhaps you have a right to know the rest." I braced myself for what was to come, my stomach churning. The truth always comes at a price, and I was already paying dearly for it. He sighed before saying, "There are things you won't like to hear." I returned home with an unrest impossible to hide. The image of Clint confessing his silence followed me like a ghost. I needed to confirm something I already feared deep down. I called Diane and Lucas, asking them to come to my house. When they arrived, they feigned surprise at my request. But there was tension in their eyes. I showed them my father's letter and the documents Elliot had brought. I observed every expression, every microreaction. "Did you know about this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Diane was the first to speak. "We never heard of this man." Lucas crossed his arms, looking away. But the discomfort was too obvious. "The letter was among his belongings. You went through them before me. You had access before me. I want to know the truth." Diane remained silent, as if calculating consequences. Lucas tried to justify. "We thought it wasn't important." My heart raced. A letter in which our father confesses the existence of another son isn't important. They didn't answer immediately. The silence confirmed what was missing. I looked at my children and felt a different pain, the pain of broken trust. The pain of realizing that physical abandonment was only part of the problem. There was also the abandonment of truth. And that hurt more than any absence. Their surprised look was too quick. I got up slowly, trying to control the trembling in my hands. "You read that letter before me," I stated, no longer as a question. Diane took a deep breath, finally admitting. "We thought it was better you didn't know. You were already sick. You had already suffered too much." My head spun. They had taken on the role of judges of my own story. "You had no right," I said, feeling my voice fail. "That letter was mine. That piece of history was mine. And you hid it." Lucas tried to approach, but I took a step back. "It was out of fear, Mom," he said. "We thought this Elliot character might be an opportunist." I laughed bitterly. "He was the only one who came when you disappeared." A wave of exhaustion washed over me. They didn't realize how much that omission weighed. It wasn't just about the letter. It was about everything. The abandonment in the hospital. The silence. The absence when I needed them. And now the lie. The bond between us was cracked. And I didn't know if it would ever be whole again. Diane picked up her purse, as if ending a conversation. "If you want to believe this man, go ahead. But don't expect us to participate in this farce." Lucas followed her, hesitant. And I stayed there alone again, with the weight of another discovery about those I loved most. What else were they hiding from me? In the days that followed, I kept my distance from Diane and Lucas. I didn't answer calls, didn't reply to messages. I needed space. Silence. Air. Elliot, on the other hand, began to appear frequently, carefully, without intruding. He brought flowers from the garden, herbal tea, and sometimes just his calm presence. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. He told me stories from his childhood, and I shared old memories of my mother. It was strange how shared pain created bonds that blood alone might not. I felt there was a kind of warmth that came without demands, just with presence. Meredith also supported me, but it was Elliot who seemed to understand the exact spot where my pain fit. With him, I didn't have to pretend. I could cry, I could be silent, I could exist. It was as if he didn't expect strength from me, just truth. And that lightness healed me more than any discourse of overcoming. I don't know when I stopped seeing him as a stranger, but at some point, distrust gave way to complicity. There was something silently familiar about Elliot. Maybe it was his restrained way of feeling the world. Maybe it was just mutual loneliness. But he was there, when no one else was. His presence didn't heal, but it reminded me that I wasn't alone. I decided to visit Clint again alone. I felt he was still holding back more than he had said. I arrived unannounced, and he greeted me with the same tired look as always. We sat on the porch as last time. "Clint, tell me the truth. All of it." He seemed to know this moment would come. And it took him a few seconds before he began to speak. "Your father was a good man, but weak in the face of certain pressures," he said. "He was threatened, yes, by powerful people. And he was afraid." I asked who these people were. Clint hesitated. Part of the family, part of the business. There was an inheritance involved. Acknowledging Elliot would change everything. My stomach churned. All for money. Again. He said he tried to convince my father to acknowledge Elliot, but then he succumbed to the fear of scandal. Society at that time was unforgiving. A child out of wedlock was certain ruin. That justification hurt me. "And what did you do?" I asked. Clint lowered his head. I helped cover the tracks. I became an accomplice. I wanted to scream, but I could only cry. My father had chosen silence. Clint had chosen silence. And my children too. 3 generations marked by omissions. 3 generations where the truth was left for later. And that later had finally arrived. He murmured. I should have stopped all that. I returned home with an unbearable weight in my heart. Nothing felt solid anymore. My family history crumbled each day, revealing layers I never would have imagined. All this time I believed in a version of my life that now seemed incomplete, manipulated, stifled by convenience. I talked to Elliot that night and told him everything. He listened patiently as always. What will you do now? He asked. And I answered sincerely. I need to know everything. Even if it hurts. Even if it destroys me. He held my hand firmly. I'll be by your side. And I knew he meant it. The night felt colder than usual. But inside me something began to warm up. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. It was a thirst for truth. A thirst to understand what really happened. Who was my father after all? Who were those who claimed to love and protect me? What was my place in this story? I decided I couldn't run anymore. The half-truths were killing me more than any physical pain. I needed the whole story. Not just what they conveniently told me. Not just what they let slip. The truth, however cruel, was still the only path to my liberation. Clint, it's time for you to tell me everything. I returned to Clint's house with Elliot by my side. This time there was no room for evasion. I knocked firmly on the door, and he answered with the same tired expression. We sat on the porch as usual, but the tension was palpable. We want to know everything, I said, my gaze fixed on his. No detours. No metaphors. Clint cleared his throat, uncomfortable. Elliot remained silent, but the expression on his face was stern. There was something different that afternoon. We didn't come seeking comfort but justice. Clint knew. He knew he could no longer hide behind vague phrases. He remained silent for what seemed like an eternity, staring at the ground. I should have told you earlier, he began, his voice low. But the truth weighs heavily. He crossed his arms as if wanting to protect his chest. Your father confided everything in me, including the most difficult decisions. I leaned closer. He confided in you to push away a son? Clint closed his eyes for a second. The anger grew within me, but it didn't explode yet. I wanted to hear. I wanted all the words he had hidden for years. And finally he spoke. The original will was altered. And I was part of it. My world spun for a second. I looked at Elliot, who didn't move. His eyes avoided ours for too long. Your father asked me to secretly adjust the will, Clint said, his voice almost gone. He was scared. Afraid of the family's reaction, of the scandal, of what people would say. I felt like I was falling into a bottomless pit. And you accept it? I asked. You erased a son? Clint hesitated, then nodded. At the time it seemed like the right thing to do. Or at least, the least destructive. He looked at Elliot for a moment. I never thought he would appear. And if he did, I thought you'd be too old to bother with it. I felt nauseous. It was as if my life had been edited for convenience. What exactly was removed? I questioned. Clint took an envelope and handed it to me. It was a copy of the original will. In it, it clearly stated, the amount reserved for Elliot Graves shall be held in trust. That had been cut from the final document, erased as if it had never existed. Elliot read in silence. His eyes were moist, but he didn't cry. He just closed the envelope firmly. I, on the other hand, couldn't contain my indignation. You chose to protect one man's reputation at the cost of another's soul. Clint lowered his head, defeated. He said, it was wrong. But I thought I was protecting you. I left Clint's house with a weight I couldn't name. On the way back, Elliot walked beside me in silence. I knew what I needed to do. That injustice could not continue as a legacy. No more. Arriving home, I sat at the table, took paper and pen, and wrote my own will. I decided that everything I had built, even with sweat and solitude, would have a just destiny. Elliot would be included as part of the family because he was. Because my blood recognized his. Because he was there when no one else was. And because he had been denied for too long, now no more. I thought of Diane and Lucas. I didn't exclude them, but I wrote clearly. The division would be equitable. And I added something else. A letter. Confession. So they would know the whole truth even if they refused to accept it. I didn't want revenge. I wanted justice. I wanted peace. I registered everything at the notary the next day, accompanied by Elliot and Meredith. When I signed, I felt a lightness I hadn't felt in a long time. It was like regaining control of my story, like rewriting the ending with my own hands. And this time without omissions. This time no one will be erased from my story. That week was intense, and my body began to give warnings. Persistent pains, constant fatigue, dizziness. I thought it was just the weight of accumulated emotions. I refused to rest, continued organizing papers, cleaning drawers, as if I was trying to put everything in order internally as well. But my body wiser demanded a pause. It was on a hot afternoon that everything went dark. I remember being in the kitchen, holding a glass of water, when the floor seemed to vanish. The sensation of falling was abrupt, followed by silence. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I opened my eyes, Elliot was there, kneeling beside me, his hands trembling. "Stay with me, Helen, please," he repeated, his eyes filled with despair. I tried to speak, but no sound came out. He carried me with effort, but with a firmness that made me cry in silence. He put me in the car and drove as if saving a life, because that's exactly what he was doing. At the hospital, the lights, the sounds, the hurried faces confused me. I heard doctors saying things I didn't understand, saw faces I didn't recognize. But I felt Elliot's hand holding mine the entire time. And that was what kept me anchored. The pain was intense, but there was something stronger. The certainty of not being alone. He carried me as if we were of the same blood. I woke up in the white room to the continuous sound of machines. Everything hurt, but especially my heart, both physical and emotional. I looked around and saw Meredith dozing in a chair. And further away Diane, standing, arms crossed, an indecipherable expression. When she realized I was watching her, she approached with a forced smile. "Hi, Mom. You gave us quite a scare." Her voice was too sweet, too artificial. I tried to smile, but it hurt, both body and soul. "Elliot brought you in time. If it weren't for him." I just nodded. She took my hand delicately, but I felt the coldness in her touch. It was a facade of presence. Like so many other times, she tried to strike up a conversation to ask how I was feeling, but I just listened. I was weak but lucid. Every word of hers was measured, calculated. And in her eyes there was more than just concern. There was expectation. It was as if she was waiting for the right moment to act. And that unsettled me. Meredith woke up and interrupted the scene. She asked the doctor about my condition, brought water, adjusted the pillow. Her presence was different, welcoming, real. Diane watched from a distance, suspicious. And I, there between the two, knew I needed to choose wisely whom to trust. Her touch was cold like her intention. In the silence of the hospital room, I understood something essential. I was vulnerable. Physically weak, emotionally exhausted, and surrounded by interests. I realized that my fragility was not just a consequence of age or illness. It was also a loophole for those who always wanted to control me. And Diane was prepared for it. I remembered her past attempts to decide for me, to shape my life to her convenience. The clinical gaze she had for everything, including feelings. Being there, under her supervision, caused me fear. A fear that was not an exaggeration, it was instinct. And that instinct told me I needed to protect myself. When the doctor spoke of possible care after discharge, I saw Diane's eyes light up. Perhaps it's best to hire someone. Or even, explore other options. Meredith noticed. She immediately intervened, suggesting I return home, with support from trusted people. Elliot confirmed. And I thanked them with my gaze. With effort, I asked Elliot to keep my documents in the new will. It wasn't paranoia. It was precaution. I couldn't allow anyone to seize my life in a moment of weakness. And there, more than ever, I understood that being alive also meant being alert. My weakness was what she was waiting for to control me. Returning home from the hospital was like crossing a fragile bridge over an emotional abyss. But Elliot was there with a serene smile, and Meredith, with her firm hands and precise words. They helped me up the steps, settled me into my favorite armchair, helped me breathe more calmly. Their presence filled the spaces that were once occupied by loneliness and silence. For the first time in weeks, I was able to sleep without fear. The following days were about rebuilding. Elliot organized my medications, prepared simple meals. Meredith took care of the house, made tea, and told stories that brought small smiles to my face. I still felt pain, still tired quickly, but there was something new in the air, hope. Everything was done with care, without rush, with genuine affection. The house, once cold, seemed to pulsate with life. Regaining strength wasn't just physical. It was also reclaiming my autonomy. Every small decision that returned to me was a victory. Choosing what to wear, what to eat, when to sunbathe. Simple things, but things that had seemed to slip from my control before. Elliot respected every boundary, and that made all the difference. Meredith, in turn, was my shield. When Diane called, she answered. When messages arrived, she filtered them. They protected my peace, but without isolating me. It was like living in a home again. A home where I was seen, heard, and cared for with dignity. Recovery was far from over, but the path was set. Being there made me feel safe, even amidst the chaos. The calm did not last long. Meredith arrived with an envelope in her hands, her face tense. It was a court summons. Diane had filed a petition for interdiction, claiming mental incapacity. The shock paralyzed me for seconds. But there were no tears, no screams. Just a chilling certainty. She would not back down. She wanted total control. Her argument is that you had a collapse and no longer have discernment, Meredith said, indignant. Elliot read the document and clenched his fists. She is trying to silence you. And she was. That was it. Diane could not accept that I was lucid, that I had rebuilt my story without her approval. I understood then that it was not just about possessions. It was power. She wanted to decide about my life, my body, my name, as she had so often tried subtly over the years. But now it was explicit. A declared war, cold and legal. And I could not run. I had to face it. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks from then. Time was running out, and I needed to strengthen myself, physically and emotionally. I gathered doctors' exams, reports. Elliot and Meredith were key witnesses. But the main thing would be my own voice. I needed to prove that I was still my own person. And more, that I never stopped being. The hearing was scheduled. And I needed to prove that I was still my own person. The weeks that followed were the most intense of my life. Each day a new effort. I relearned to walk steadily, to sustain my voice, to organize my thoughts. Elliot read texts with me, asked me questions as if we were training. Meredith took care of the environment, my rest, my mind. It was a trio. A bond. I discovered a strength I thought I had lost. The Helen who raised children alone, who faced arrogant neighbors, who cared for her parents until the end. She was coming back. Not out of pride, but out of necessity. I could no longer allow anyone to decide for me. It was now or never. My identity was at stake. At night, I talked to Elliot about the future. He always listened more than he spoke, but his words were anchors. You went through all of this. It wasn't for nothing. Meredith, in her more direct way, said, they underestimated you, and they will regret it. Their voices sustained me like pillars. When Diane tried to approach me again, feigning cordiality, I simply smiled. She no longer knew who she was facing. She was accustomed to the fragile, hesitant mother, always seeking to please. That version no longer existed. In the mirror now there was a woman who knew her pain and finally her strength. I would no longer be a silenced woman. I arrived at the courthouse supported by Elliot and Meredith, but with my own firm steps. I wore my best clothes not out of vanity but out of respect for myself. When I entered the courtroom, all eyes turned. Diane and Lucas were there side by side, as if still representing some family unity. But I saw the distance between them, and it was greater than any court. I sat in the reserved chair and awaited my moment. The judge read the process, listened to arguments. Diane spoke eloquently, feigning concern. Our mother needs care. She is no longer in a condition to decide alone. That hurt me, but it didn't shake me, because my turn had come. And I stood up. My hand trembled a little, but my voice did not. I spoke. About my life, my efforts, my choices. About the collapse, yes. But also about the recovery. About lucidity, self-love, dignity. I told what had been done behind the scenes. And I looked directly into her eyes as I said, I am not a burden, nor an object to be managed. The judge listened attentively, and I continued. I spoke of my father's letter, of Elliot, of my children's omission, of the will, of every silence that hurt me. But now my voice was sound. It was presence. It was a rupture of the cycle. It was an elegant and firm cry for freedom. My voice did not tremble. It was the sound of my truth. All eyes were on me, and surprisingly I did not feel small. For the first time I feared none of them. Neither Diane's cold eyes, nor Lucas's hesitation, nor the judgment on the faces in the audience. I was there whole, without hiding the pain, without being ashamed of my truth. I revealed everything, with details. I showed documents, letters, testimonies. Elliot was called and confirmed everything with serenity. Meredith spoke with passion, and each new revelation made Diane's attempted version unsustainable. She began to become unsettled. Her arrogant tone gave way to discomfort. For the first time she was not controlling the narrative. The judge called for silence several times, but the expressions spoke for themselves. Some whispered. Others just looked in astonishment. And I, there with my heart exposed, discovered that the truth, even painful, had power. Frees us. And it also frees those who have listened to us in silence for so long. When I finished, I sat back down. Tired but not defeated. The judge suspended the session for final analysis. Diane gave me a look of contained anger. I simply returned it with serenity. I knew the outcome no longer mattered. My dignity had already been restored. In public. Aloud. All eyes were on me. For the first time I feared none of them. When the judge returned to the room, the silence was absolute. He calmly leafed through the papers, consulted the documents. And then with a firm voice, he delivered the verdict. Mrs. Helen Whitmore has demonstrated full lucidity and capacity. This court recognizes her right to autonomy and rejects the petition for interdiction. A wave of relief swept through my body. Meredith held my hand, emotional. Elliot smiled with tear-filled eyes. Diane lowered her face, defeated. Lucas said nothing. The judge continued. This case reminds us that aging is not synonymous with incapacity, and that the truth, however difficult, must be heard. I left the room with my head held high. Outside, the sun shone as I hadn't seen it in a long time. The air felt lighter. I walked slowly, savoring each step. It was not just a legal victory. It was the beginning of a new cycle. I was no longer a shadow. I was not the past. I was the present. And I was my own person. Life had knocked me down many times. But that day, I understood that I was always capable of getting up. With more pain, perhaps. With more wrinkles, undoubtedly. But with more courage. The world silenced me for a long time. Now I spoke. And everyone listened. My life was mine again. And I would no longer give it to anyone. Now, I'm curious about you who heard my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you experienced anything similar? Support the channel by subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing this video. I'm leaving another story on the final screen that you'll also enjoy, and it will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.